Good morning, everyone. Welcome to AFN 128, also ANT 128, Black Women in Africa and the Atlantic. Today is Thursday, November 17th, 2022. So welcome, everybody. For our lecture today, we're going to be rounding up on the course content, looking at the historical overview of pre-colonial African women and ancient African women, and ancient African women and civilization, looking at the power of women in the African continent, especially in the matrilineal, looking at the matrilineal and patrilineal scope of women's work, the view on women, and the types of power that the pre-colonial African woman had. Also in today's class, we'll be looking at, how African women were part of the liberation. Liberation and, fighting for equality during the colonial times and, post-colonial, African women's work. And then we're going to round up that lecture. So once that lecture is done for that section of the week, we will be moving to watching some short video on African women and liberation. And then we will have some small group discussion on the first part of the lecture so far for today. And depending on, the time that we have or the time limit that we're working against, we may be able to move on into other content from the syllabus. But after the small group discussion, we're going to stop the recording and use that time for, to chat about the required work due. Because we have just 4 weeks or so before this semester is over. So do you have any questions so far? All right. So any questions that you have about the syllabus or work due, save those for after the small group discussion. Okay, so good to see everybody here today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Give me a second, please. Can you see my screen? Can you do a thumbs up if you can see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. Okay, great. So this presentation that I'm going to be sharing with you today was done by my sister, actually, who is also a college professor at the Metro Community College in Omaha, Nebraska. She's been a guest speaker in this class on a number of occasions. I mean, previous sections of this course, she was here last fall, and I believe the spring previously. So the title of the presentation that she made is on the power of women and the nature of influence of gender roles in pre-colonial Africa. So from the course text, we started by looking at what feminism meant, to many of you, and what exactly you understood by that word, feminism. And many of you did post a lot of, responses on Blackboard about, feminism, what it meant to you, from looking at women's struggles or, discussing women's human rights or respecting women or the active participation of women and how, they can gain support or, the way that women are viewed and, looking to break into the society to be equal. So I did see a number of good responses on there. But usually when I teach this class, I want to start with looking at women not from the diaspora perspective. Immediately, not teaching about women in the United States or Black women in the United States, or Black women in, the Caribbean. I want us to start from once upon a time. Once upon a time, there was a continent called Africa, which still exists today. And it's not a country, so, it's an entire continent with women from all types of walks of life, different culture, different build, different make, different knowledge, different scope, from the north to the south, to the east, to the west, to the central, parts of the continent. And before Black women were transported to the diaspora, which is anything outside of the continent of Africa, is known as the diaspora of the African continent. So before these African women, or the African women, or the Black women that we have in the Americas today got here, they once upon a time were in Africa. And, they had all types of roles, expectations, all types of duties. They were known for different types of, notable work. They were advisors, they were queen mothers, they were, economic advisors, they were market women, they were business women, they were, all types of things, educators, doctors, everything, but of course not in the scope of the Western connotation of what we describe these things are today. So I wanted us to round up the reading and learning, from the learning resources on Blackboard for the past 3 weeks on pre-colonial African women, and then we're going to move to African women today, so that we can see from the beginning of this course, the first few weeks, looking at African women and the power that they had in pre-colonial times. And pre-colonial times means before colonization, before European or even Arabization of different parts of the continent, but mainly before the countries that you see on the map of Africa today. Prior to that, all these locations were, they were not countries that we have 54, 55 countries today. They were just kingdoms, empires, different communities where specific individuals or specific types of women were known for their contributions, their notable contributions. Of course, don't get it wrong. Everything was not always rosy, but when we're looking at the socio-economic or even political value of women in the society, pre-colonial African women had a lot of notable roles. They did not have the types of roles that during colonization, the types of roles that were imported from Europe and then infused into the African society of how women need to be, regarded as. So in Western ideology, African women or pre-colonial African women were stereotyped against because the Europeans who ventured into Africa later did not understand, why women would be given a lot of power, why there were women who, held key positions, had very high roles in the society. There were women who were kingmakers. As a matter of fact, if you wanted to have the next king that would be ruling a kingdom or a community, without the voice of the women, that king would not be installed. The same as, economic situations in the community, you had to involve the women who most times, if not all the time, were the ones who were the breadwinners, like the people, the individuals or the group that would go, for trading with other communities, lead trading expeditions and, invite other market people to bring goods into their communities to buy and sell. So pre-colonial African women had more rights, regardless of what you've been hearing, that Africa was not a civilized continent and people did not have a way to think or make decisions before Europeans got there. That was clearly not the case. Of course, Africa has been sidelined because not a lot of the history or historical documents are written. They're usually passed on orally from generation to generation. So when you're competing with European style types of history or communication, you don't have the evidence in your hands that, oh, this was written and I can find this documentation here. There was no proof per se in a specific library that you could Google or, go consult and find the info. You had to go to a specific individual, a group of people. Sometimes they're known as griots or, community historians to tell you or inform you of those messages, sometimes through artwork, as in the case of, going to, Egypt and looking at the walls of the temples or the pyramids. You could find a lot of documentation there. Of course, African history is not all Egypt, but there's a lot of documentation in terms of, the history of that region, on the walls at some point in time, which still exists today. We have places like in Ethiopia where, the different dynasties that existed at some point in time, they were able to invent their own writing, like the Ge'ez writing in the northern part of Ethiopia. We have the Insibidi writing in the southern or southeastern part of Nigeria. We have the Akan writing symbols in Ghana, and so on and so forth. But other locations, they would have carvings or statues, and they will be able to tell the story of notable or powerful women in the community by erecting a statue or monument of their figure or image or carving or stonework in the center of town or in some place where the locals will be able to tell you about that woman. So moving on, we don't want to compare African women and their worth or to European women, because of course the societies were different. The situations in Africa at the time, the living conditions, you cannot compare it to Europe. So if we look also at a lot of activities that took place, women were always at the forefront in pre-colonial Africa. We could give examples of queens and warrior queens. As a matter of fact, how many of you have watched the female warrior? Is it the female warrior by the Wakanda
Woman King?
Sorry?
Woman King?
Yes, the woman king, not the female warrior. How many of you have watched it?
I did.
Okay, or heard about it. So that's actually an example. It was based on the Dahomey Amazon warrior women. At some point, these women were like generals and warriors that the kingdom would send to fight on their behalf. But you never hear where women were in the army, and we're not talking about the types of army that you have, like Army Reserve that you have today, but something very similar. And that movie was actually made out of the history of the Dahomey Amazon women warriors who existed at some point in time. And for lack of better words, they kicked a lot of butts. So we have so many examples, which I'm going to show you in this presentation of historical or notable African women that we often do not even hear about. We see the National Geographic aspect of the African society, or the hungry part of Africa and underdeveloped, not educated, not up to par to Western world of the African society. But if we dig deep into history, the history of Africa came before even European history. There were times where Africans were hired or imported or even borrowed or begged to come build European cities and offer civilizations to many locations in Europe, bringing a lot of technology from Africa that did not exist at the time in Europe. A lot of architecture that Africans designed, and, either free willingly, because, the African at the time was very generous. They like to welcome people into the community. It's the same with the history of everywhere that has been colonized. Usually the indigenous people or the locals are very, very generous. They're welcoming and they like to live together in peace. But when colonials come, Europeans or other people who, if at one point in time were trading partners, and they see an advantage and start reading meaning into different communities, saying, oh, wow, these people don't even have a clue. They don't know how to do this. They don't know how to blah, blah, blah. And in most cases, they come with an agenda, So anyway, that's how most of these locations ended up getting colonized. But in short, many Africans, especially women, were at the forefront of, assisting locations in Europe, educating about, hygiene, about bath products, about community development, about economic development, about partnership, about working alongside your husband or other men in the community and not being subservient, staying, at the back burner. Many African women actually aided Europeans, helped build communities, traveled back and forth without any, interference until much, much later, as we will see, starting with, the slave trade and how then things started getting upside down on the continent. But an example that is showing up on the screen is looking at, Queen Hatshepsut of Egypt, who was a queen. She had the full authority of a female, of a male king. She was a pharaoh, even though she was a female, she often dressed as a male and commanded so much respect. As a matter of fact, she had to grow some beard and walked around like a male. Like generals would respect her, and priests, everybody would respect her. And so many other instances where there were high level African women in the society. This is another example. This is the head of the Queen Mother of the Benin Empire, not to be confused with the Republic of Benin, that is French speaking, next to Nigeria and next to Togo. The woman king story that I mentioned a few moments ago came out of Dahomey. That was the previous name. It used to be called Dahomey, and then they changed the name to Benin. But this Benin that we're looking at, this figurine here, is different. This is the Kingdom of Benin, which is in the southern part of current day Nigeria. And the Queen Mother was the chief advisor of the king. So the king rarely or never took any decisions or any step in the kingdom without consulting the Queen Mother. And the Queen Mother would have several other female advisors that would advise the king. So wasn't that wonderful that, women were included in key decision-making in pre-colonial Africa? And, most of these women had parallel authorities as the males would have. So another example, looking at Queen Cleopatra also in Egypt, she commanded a lot of, different activities, and, she was very well respected. Another is Queen of Sheba, Queen Makeda of Sheba. So her Ethiopian name was Makeda, in the kingdom of Sheba, which was under Ethiopia at the time. Very well known that, the Queen of Sheba actually produced an heir to the Ethiopian dynasty, which ruled for about 3,000 years, or about 250 generations later, ending with, Emperor Haile Selassie in 1974. So, these were very, very, very well-known, queens at the time, or queen mothers. We have various queens in the Kushite kingdom of current day. We have Sudan and Somalia. And, most people, when you hear of Nubians, they think only Nubians that were part of, like the servants to the Egyptians, and usually would not make anything of the Nubians in Sudan. But this location, as a matter of fact, is known that with the advice of female leaders, Sudan actually has more pyramids than Egypt. But you would not believe it, because it's not commercialized like the Egyptian pyramids. They're not as tall as Egyptian pyramids. So moving on, we have, female ministers. For example, in the Yoruba kingdom in Western Nigeria, we have what we call as Iyalodis. And these Iyalodis are like, like the Minister of Women Affairs, or like the, something like a national security advisor to the king, or something like that, on women affairs, or on anything economic development, anything that would impact the community or the society, be it economically, like agriculturally, poverty, education of children and women, or health-wise, anything that would impact, the development of those communities. We would have what we called Iyalode, and the king had to respect her, because without the women who would bring home the agricultural crops, the communities would not thrive. A lot of the agriculture was left in the hands of women, which at the time women owned a lot of land, to be able to farm on, to feed their children, to feed the extended family, to feed other people in the communities. So as you can see, women had so much power in pre-colonial Africa. As a matter of fact, even the way that women were looked upon in pre-colonial Africa could not be compared to women's role during colonization, because they were virtually non-existent. Even men were trying to fight for their own rights to be somebody during colonization. And then after colonization, men, with the help of Europeans, were able to bring your colonial policies as part of independent policies that left women behind, and it was just a disaster. So otherwise, if colonization, slavery, and other intrusion did not happen on the continent of Africa, Africa may not be to the standard of what we're calling Western civilization or development as today, but definitely the continent had its own growth. It developed, it was way advanced than many places in Europe. When you're talking of, literacy, we're not looking at academic books like the way that we're thinking of in today's context. Africans were by far highly educated, in pre-colonial times. they had a lot of knowledge of how to do a lot of things. But when we say local education, we bring down the knowledge or the power of, the imagination or the existence or awareness of the African, which I think we need to start reversing even the way that we address each other, because we say, oh, Western stuff, Western civilization, Western knowledge, not up to par with developed country. It's like local stuff, or local women who do things on a small scale, but women at the time did not need to leave their communities to venture to live in other places. And even though there were others who traveled for trade or, to have, to grow crops in one community and then go to another location, live there, sell the previous crops, and then go back the following harvest season to their locations. So here is an image of Queen Hatshepsut. You see, she has a beard. She was an Egyptian queen who had the same authority or notoriety of May Pharaoh. So on this page here, I'm showing you the early kingdoms in sub-Sahara Africa. And this was before the current map of Africa with all the countries that we have today. We had the Ghana kingdom, the Wolof kingdom, the Mali, the Songhai, the Ashanti, Nupe, Congo, Buganda, Ethiopia, Aksum, Nubia, Kush, Kosa, Zulu, Zimbabwe, Angola, so many places, Dahomey, Bini, Oyo, Nupe, Hausa, Borno, so many kingdoms where, they were independent off of each other. They weren't merged into, one country or divided between two different countries as we have Africa divided up today. So at that time, each of these kingdoms, I don't believe there was any kingdom or empire that existed in pre-colonial Africa where women were not part of the kingship, where women were not part of the decision making. So they were always part of the decision making. They were highly respected. As a matter of fact, I think they were even more respected than the male. So for example, if you go to this region, actually, let me bring up the screen to here. You see the Ankh, it's like the cross, but it's the Ankh, A-N-K-H. You should look it up. It's a symbol of life, and you're going to find a lot in Kemetic history that the woman was valued as the procreator of human life. So anything that brings life, anything that brings knowledge, anything that generates into the future was highly respected, in the African context. Of course, don't get me wrong, not everything was like paradise. Of course, there were instances where, wars were waged and female servants were captured and used as concubines or as housemaids and things like that. But what I'm trying to say is that on a normal scope, on a day-to-day scope, the continent of Africa was way well developed than any other continent around the world, and could compete in terms of women's leadership, of women's capabilities, women's liberation, women's struggle. I don't even think there was anything like women's struggle at the time, because it was already well known and made in the society that there had to be a role for women. It was not disputed. There was a place for women in the society. So every community had a way in which women were regarded, and it depended on where that society was located, the types of amenities or crops or economic activities that were taking place. So moving on, I did mention already about Queen of Sheba. For those of you who know about the Bible, and for those of you who are curious enough, you can actually find that the Queen of Sheba of Ethiopia, Queen Makeda of Sheba, you will see it in the Bible. She was mentioned in there. Ethiopia, queens of Ethiopia were mentioned in the Bible. Nubian queens, Nubian women were mentioned in the Old Testament. So Cushite women were mentioned in the Old Testament. As a matter of fact, Moses, the Moses who led the, I believe Egyptians out of Egypt through the Red Sea or something like that, he was married to an Ethiopian. So, a lot of history, has evidence that women had high place in the society in Africa. So now looking at more power of women in pre-colonial Africa. And for those of you who haven't seen The Male King, I would, I'm not getting any royalty, by the way, I would suggest you guys to go view that movie. And you're going to see a lot of connection between what we're talking about today, some of the content that I've posted on Blackboard, and scenes from that movie. And do your own independent research about pre-colonial African women. You'll be amazed. So another great woman in pre-colonial Africa was Queen Amanirenas. She was a one-eyed king in the kingdom of Kush, and this around Sudan, around Sudan, the southern or eastern or so part of Ethiopia and Sudan, Somalia area today. So, she was a one-eyed queen. Of course, her one-eyedness had nothing to do with her capabilities to wage a war against the Roman army who wanted to take over that region. And, she was able to, behead their general, and, was able to take some of the army, the Roman army, hostage, and they were defeated. And for the next 300 years, believe it or not, the Romans did not dare, come near the Kushite Empire to want to wage a war or take over that location. So here, we're going to West Africa. This is another warrior queen, Queen Amina of Zaria. She was, from the kingdom of, the Hausa kingdom in northern part of Nigeria today. And she also was influential in defending her kingdom against, various invaders such as Arabs or others from Northern Africa. Then we have another warrior queen, Queen Nzinga of Angola. Queen Nzinga was instrumental in saving the Angola region, against the Portuguese, who wanted to continue slave trade and to demean the role or the rights of women in that communities. As a matter of fact, when we get to the topic where we're looking at slave trade before African women were transported into the Americas, we will find out that besides the Arab slave trade, which many do not even talk about, they look more at the transatlantic, path of slave trade from Africa to the Americas. And, that all started with the Portuguese. The Portuguese were great trading partners to the Africans for many, many, many centuries. As a matter of fact, they were the middlemen to the entire of Europe, where, they would set up posts and trade nicely, friendly with the Africans, until all of a sudden they decided that, they had better skill or capabilities or knowledge or thoughts or technological know-how or how to think faster than the Africans. And, it started with economic bribery, and then, started to manipulate the thoughts of, African men into thinking that they were better than the other. And you're going to see a correlation between the, Black men or Black thoughts of men in the diaspora and the way which much, much later Black women started getting treated, whether in Africa or in the Americas. It started with manipulation before the transatlantic path of slave trade from the African continent to the Americas. It started with, erasing or reshaping the identity of the Black man, which pre-colonial times, the Black man and the Black woman worked side by side, worked alongside the other. As a matter of fact, the Black woman was always ahead in terms of thoughts and knowledge and what to do in the society than the Black man. And the Black man had to be of listening ears, because anything that produced life, anything that procreated, anything that, took care of the community was to be preserved and respected. Unfortunately, with the advent of, Europeans in the, continent, they started manipulating the way that things were done. And, the welcoming African always yield to welcoming visitors, welcoming foreigners. They want to hear more from you. They want to learn more from you, until they started getting a different type of idea that, oh, maybe if I'm more powerful, she would do this, she would do that. And look at the state of the Black world today, whether we're talking of, on the African continent, in the Caribbean, or right here in the United States. The Black race, you can see, has, been at the bottom for such a long time that in terms of reclaiming the African identity, we're way back compared to even other communities or societies that experienced slavery or colonization or even war or any other type of comparable activities that happen to the Black race. We're still not united. We're still fighting to talk to each other. And, it's very unfortunate that we let go of so much of our own history that, was at the, in our own hands. And so unfortunate that trying to forge the path to pre-colonial Africa and reclaiming, the African history by bringing, the rights of the Black woman forth, it's becoming something that is so tedious that we don't know where to start from. There's so many divisions, so many different things going on in the divided up continent and in, the diaspora, that I myself don't know how long is going to take for, Africa to unite, for the respect of women or Black women, whether on the African continent or in the diaspora, to, be on the surface and be the first priority as they were in pre-colonial Africa. So here's another warrior queen, Queen Nana Ya Asantewa from, the Ashanti Empire in Ghana. So remember, most of these empires and countries we have today may not have existed in the current country. So for example, we have the country of Ghana today. The Ashanti Empire may not have been in, exclusively in the current country of Ghana today. It may have been part of, some part of Ivory Coast, some part of other country around Ghana, but that's what colonization did to the continent, which divided up different communities. But, at the time, this Queen Nana Asantewa was influential in fighting the British, I believe, who wanted to take over her community. And when they imposed a lot of taxation on agricultural goods and products, imagine how the African was perplexed, because many Africans would live in they would grow crops for themselves and not, to sell. It would be subsistent agriculture, which means they would only grow it to feed their families, and whatever was extra, they would exchange with their neighbors or gift to their other communities in exchange for other products. And that's how a lot of trading was done. Sometimes, they would go far and, take some crops or items to barter. And the system of barter was well known. There were no taxes paid on what you produced in your own yard until the British came and, they imposed a lot of administrative whatever on the Africans. And most of the women, as I mentioned earlier, they were the ones that were, responsible for growing crops, for bringing food to the family and the community. And if they were not working and they only took care of their family, planting, just enough for the family to eat, where would they get money from to be able to pay taxes to the British? It's not like they were paying taxes to grow their communities. These taxes were taken overseas to develop European nations and making them much, much better than African nations. So when the men had no clue on what to do, they actually started, they wanted to start paying these taxes, or they were paying to some point that things became so bad. There came Nana Ashantewa. This was the mother of the king at the time. She took up, the arm. You can see her with a gun and her military regalia. And she got a couple of women warriors and women leaders together in the community. And they were able to fight the British, who was trying to take her son, the king, out of the, country or the community. And they waged a lot of war until they won. And this also happened in, with the Aba women riot of the 1920s in the southern part or eastern part of Nigeria, where the women took up arms. The arms they took up was just to strip themselves naked and walk in front, in the community. And in most of these communities, once the women go naked on the street, nobody, trust me, want to see their mother mad and naked in the town square. All the men would be afraid. So once you strip naked and, the men know is the dissatisfaction. Remember the example that I gave of the ankh, which is the symbol, of femininity, of symbol of procreation, symbol of life. Wherever there is life coming from, you have to give respect to that source. And once the women strip naked, like, you're not listening to us, you're not respecting us, we brought you here, we can send you to where you came from, men will start thinking, So this happened also with the Aba women's riots, fighting the imposition of colonial taxation in the eastern, southern, or southeastern part of Nigeria in the 20s. So here we have another warrior queen in Ethiopia. This one is from Ethiopia, Empress Betul, Tatu Betul, wife of Menelik II, who was the queen in Ethiopia. And she was also instrumental in the War of Adwa, where the Italians came to Ethiopia and wanted to wage a war. As a matter of fact, not wanted to wage a war. They actually waged a war and wanted to take over Ethiopia. And if you recall in the African history, Ethiopia and Liberia were the two countries that were not colonized out of all the continent, out of all the countries that you have in Africa today. But notably, the Battle of Adwa, went on for such a long time that this empress at that time then took command of the Ethiopian army, and they were able to defeat the Italians. So you see, on the African continent, you have, if you give women their role, the place, leave them in their place, give them the ability to think, to make decisions, there'll be a lot of good things happening on the continent. And these were all in pre-colonial times. Some of these actually did take place during colonization before independence. So with the Aba women's riots, all those were in the 20s and, right before, a few years before independence. So going back to Queen Tatu Betu, the wife of King Menelik II, she was instrumental in finding the current day capital of Ethiopia, known as Addis Ababa. And if many of you recall, King Menelik II is not the King Menelik I, who was the son of Queen of Sheba, who had a relationship with King Solomon of Israel. And that's how the first king of the Solomonic dynasty, King Menelik I, was born. And it was from his generation that for 3,000 years, the Solomonic dynasty ruled Ethiopia until 1974, for 225 generations or so later. So when we're looking at the power of the African woman, we have to know that invasion, colonization, intrusion was what brought the power of the African woman down. So in places where outside religion was accepted, like, Islamic religion or Christian religion or other religion, the mindset of the Africans shifted, where there were a lot of economic activities where people learned about writing system, about trades, about history. People started getting other types of knowledge that were not the same as what they were used to in their societies. But some of those knowledge was very good. It was used to advance or add to what those societies produced at the time. In other places, they were used to the detriment of the society. At one point in time, most women in the African society were free to marry who they wanted. They were not forced into marriage. They would even help men in their families to find wives or co-wives. And when we say co-wives, it's not the connotation that we have today, where you think on the aspect of sexual attraction or physical attraction. When you had co-wives at the time, in pre-colonial times, there were a lot of farm work. There was a lot of farm work to do. So women would need the added support for other women who would be able to bear children and be part of the family, to work these lands and be part of the family. Of course, they wouldn't be living in one-room apartment where everybody will trample upon each other and be fighting each other. Everyone had their own space, and they would share a lot of the duties or household chores. So even during childbirth or after childbirth, you wouldn't find a limitation of hospitalization, like you give birth today, 2 days later or the next day, because you don't have health insurance or you don't want to pay you don't have enough money for the bill, you'll be told to go home and just check in with your doctor every now and then, and you'll be the only one raising the baby. And then you have all these health issues, mental issues, postpartum depression. It was not known in Africa at the time, because there were always women around. As a matter of fact, the person who just gave birth was like a queen. You would have all types of women in the family raising the child, taking care, from feeding to bathing, even to breastfeed the child. They would literally bring the child to the mother, and the only thing you would do would be to even just hold up the child, to bond with the child, to nurse them. And after that, that's it, So we didn't have all those postpartum depression or health issues back then. That's why you see many African women, they're very voluptuous, they're very big, because once you get married, you cannot remain skinny. People will be asking, you're not taking care of your wife. They would even in some communities, like if you go to places in East Africa, they have fattening rooms. The Igbos of Nigeria also have fattening rooms where for a number of weeks or days before a female got married, they will be in a room where all they would do will be nothing but eat from morning till night, because you had to be a certain weight before you got married. In many communities, you had to be able to dance with your back end and show that you can whine and dance and do a lot of things. So to many, this may be like a pressure or looking down on women, but culture and customs did differ in many African communities. So the other thing, how when you want to get married in the Western world, most times the female will be the one to pay for the wedding. It's unheard to pre-colonial African society that a woman will pay for her own wedding. If that is the case, why are women behind? If I'm the one financially contributing to my own wedding, you should not be able to be telling me what to be doing in the house. So in many African societies, a dowry would be paid to the family of the bride, because you had to, of course, take care of the wife, but not the wife taking care of herself or you. It's unheard of. So in many European countries, it was the reverse. The woman, of course, would pay. And typically, they would also stay behind, listening to what the men folk had to tell them all the time. And women in European communities are seen as burden most times, but not in Africa. They were they were known and revered as productive, elements of the society. So contrary to Western thinking, a dowry was not a sale like we see in, National Geographic, but I think they've corrected a lot of history context about Africa nowadays, because they're including many African, academics in the thought process or in the knowledge production or creation about the history of Africa. Many years ago, the history of Africa was limited in terms of scope and find, because most of those history were told by explorers who traveled around the African continent. Some would spread a lot of false and negative, activity or information about Africa, but there were many who actually were honest and produced a lot of good work. But nowadays, there's so many African historians from the African continent or Africans outside of the African continent who can rewrite their history based on pre-colonial Africa and modern Africa, and from their own observations and experiences as Africans living outside of Africa or Africans still living on the continent. So another aspect of looking at, the great work or inclusion of African women is looking at African female servants. I mentioned a few moments ago that even though societies differed, sometimes wars would be waged and, hostages would be held captives. Many times women would also be held captives as concubines or servants in the captive's home. But after a while, they would be able to rise in rank, instead of remaining as servants forever, under the power. We cannot compare. If we have to compare wars and servitude in pre-colonial Africa to, during slavery in the Americas and especially in the United States, we're going to find that it's not even, you cannot compare the role of the Black woman in African history, whether as a slave in Africa compared to being a slave in the Americas. We will be looking at Black women and slavery and the impact of slavery on the Black women in the Americas. If you read African history and women slaves in Africa, on the African continent, prior to the transatlantic slave trade, it was not sadistic as it were in the Americas. You cannot even, let's not even go into that. Let me just give you the good stuff information about African women and the power that African women had in pre-colonial Africa and leading up to independence and post-independence times. So in places like in Timbuktu, and Timbuktu is part of the current day country of Mali, and in the Songhai Empire, around the same area next to each other where the country of Mali and Burkina Faso are today, you're going to find that former slaves were able to rise to being, queen mothers, which were the advisors or mothers of kings in those locations. And of course, there was a lot of human rights that was bestowed on African women in traditional African society. They were not savagely treated like you would find in European countries or when women were captured and sold into slavery in the Americas. So here, I will continue by sharing with you the power of African women. In Ethiopia, there was a female saint that existed. As a matter of fact, it was after she passed away that they made her into a saint, and her name was Saint Walata Petrus. She existed from 1592 to 1642, and her story confirmed that she was part of the royal chronicles in Ethiopia. So if you look at this book right here, I believe this is a part of the ancient and old Ethiopian Bible, which is one of the oldest documentation of historical facts about the church history from Ethiopia to parts of the Middle East and back. And it tells the story of Christianity from the Middle East to Ethiopia and different places from Egypt to everywhere. So Saint Walata was a nun who existed in Ethiopian Christianity, and then she was made a saint. So when you look at history of angels or story of angels or saints, you rarely, if at all, of any Black saint, whether a male or female. But here is one, and she was from Ethiopia as part of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. Any questions so far about the content that we shared today? You can unmute yourself. No questions. Okay. So now that we've had a lot of information about the power of the Black woman in pre-colonial times, remember we're rounding up the content of African women and decision making, African women and power, African women and inclusion in today's lecture. So we've gone through the pre-colonial history of great African women and their contributions to the African society prior to European or other invasion by outsiders or non-Africans from the continent. So now let us go to colonization. Under colonization, African women's rights were pretty much non-existent. There was the Arabization of the African society prior to the transatlantic slave trade, prior to European invasion of African kingdoms and empires. So a lot of Africans at that time had converted to Islam. We're going to find instances in West Africa and in Eastern Africa where entire communities let go of their own culture, their own traditions, their own way of life in support of, the Arab, way of thinking, the Arab way of doing business, the Arab writing, which of course there were a lot of benefits. I mentioned earlier that most of Africa's history was non-written. Most of the history was oral. So if you wanted to find out about Africa's history, you would have to go to a person like a griot or a historian or someone very aged who had existed in a community for such a long period of time to be able to inform you of the history or story of that community. So when the Arabs came to Africa, because in Islam, women, of course, were traders. They were also supportive of men's role, but the religion that was adopted or accepted by Africans viewed women as non-partners and had to be secluded. So many African women, when their husbands or kings accepted Islam, communities were changed where women's role or their visibility was transformed. It did not mean that they had to be covered up all the time. Of course, in many Muslim communities, women were covered up all the time, but women were separated from men. They would make decisions, but at a very, very lower level. They weren't as versatile as during pre-colonial times, but they were still there. Sometimes they were absent. Sometimes they were forgotten. But during the colonial era, when Europeans took over much of the continent, and this was even before chopping up, the countries, that we have today into the countries that are currently in Africa today. A lot of women's roles were, put behind. Women were no longer at the forefront of economic activities, trading as they used to freely do with, people around different parts of the world. Europeans only wanted to trade with men. And of course, many of the men were not good merchants. They would be able to haul goods on behalf of women, but the women would be the one to tell you what goods would come from the farm, when they would come from the farm, how much would be harvested in a particular time of the year, the other community where they will partner together and farm together or make clothes or trinkets or jewelry or other items. They were no longer viable, they were no longer welcome. And most times the men also wanted to negotiate with Europeans so that they could quickly get money to be able to sustain their families. And from there, a lot of gap started happening between men and women in Africa. So there was a lot of adverse effect of capitalist activities on the development of African women. And there's been a lot of studies during the colonial times when Europeans invaded the continent of Africa, and even after colonial times when African countries fought for independence, women had a lot of disadvantaged roles. Of course, during the pre-colonial times, they were very well sought after. During colonial times, they were at the back burner. They hardly even knew that they existed. As a matter of fact, it led to a lot of confusion in decision-making in many, many communities in Africa. And after colonization, when African countries started fighting for independence or gained independence, even though they had women as their back support, to fight for independence, to chase the Europeans away and establish, societies for themselves so that, things would be back how they were during colonial times. The African men, shifted the policy or introduced or adopted the same policies that Europeans had, like administrative and colonial policies that divided up the society, were carried over. So this led to many women still being at the back. There was a division of labor where women were not, too sought after. And the other aspect is that only the men would be recognized. But pre-colonial times, it was working hand in hand. And later on during colonial times, the men would work in maybe administrative agencies that the Europeans established. And women, the work of women started getting more in the household. There were religious aspects of living in the African society where Christianity banned the marriage of multiple women. Now you could only have one woman to be married to, which gave more women a lot of work to do on the farm, a lot of work to do in the household. The division of labor in the house also fell just on the shoulders of the African woman. And after independence, the same thing happened. Men would go to the cities, to the urban areas to find employment, and then would not return home for months in time, leaving the African woman and the children, at home. And this led to a lot of disorganization in the African society during independence period and even later. So now, what has all these activities, what have they got to do with the current day African women in the, looking at the continent of Africa and the growth of how women in the society have been after post-independence? Have they been good? Have they remained stagnant? Or have they fared worse to the benefit of the African woman? So when we look at indices of gender and development, we're going to find out that African women, we cannot compare their growth to women in other countries. The rate in which African women have developed is still relatively low than in other communities. So if we look at sub-Saharan Africa, for example, it is widely known that just like in pre-colonial times, women do 75% of the agricultural work, but women do not own 75% of the land in which they do work on. You see? So this is a reverse from during pre-colonial times, because in pre-colonial times, women could own land. Women could farm freely on those lands. But during colonization, all these were taken up either by men or by Europeans. So women had to start purchasing their own lands, after independence. They had to start purchasing back those lands. And you tell me where the money that they were purchasing lands from came from. They had to leave their families, and just like men had to go work outside of the home, neglecting their families to be able to purchase land so that they can work on. And even when they purchase lands, men would then take these lands from them, and women may not even have access to those lands. So think about what you've just heard: neglecting the family, abuse of the Black woman, making the Black woman struggle. So when you think of the experiences of the African woman on the African continent, and fast forward, you begin to think of the plight of the Black woman in the Americas, the United States, places in the Caribbean, and where African women were transported to because of the Atlantic route of the slave trade to the Americas, you're going to find out that this started with problems already on the continent of Africa. And, by, invasion of Europe to colonize the continent. And then the same pattern of activities, you see the same mentality were brought to the Americas. We're thinking of the scope or state of the Black woman, who always is, has to take care of other people's children or family, or has to struggle beyond necessary, or have to be the breadwinner in places or cases where the men were not present, either they're absent working in other cities, or they've just neglected the family, and the Black woman had to pick up the tab to be the one responsible for making sure that her children were fed, or people in the community and things like that. So there's a correlation, historical correlation in the plight of the development of looking at the Black woman as a person within the Black race, or in Africa or outside of the African continent. So again, one major problem is that there's a very large percentage of women, Black women or African women in Africa, who do not have a lot of control over agricultural land like men do nowadays. Policymakers and agricultural development planners would often ignore the work of women. Women were not to be seen or heard, but just kept behind, and their their advice or their decision making or their contributions were not to be appreciated, like how they were in pre-colonial times. So when women don't have access to food or agricultural production, when they don't have access to land, when they don't have access to a lot of economic activities, when their decision making or their contributions are sidelined from what makes a society thrive, generations will begin to suffer because the women are absent in terms of decision making. So since the 60s, after independence, many countries were forced to contribute to concentrate on cash crop, which means to grow this food, to export them for money. And in neglecting that, if you're going to produce goods, you have to think of how you're going to eat some of those goods. But people were after money, 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 to be able to pay bills, to be able to pay taxes. And then they forgot, to be able, they forgot how they were going to be farming to produce for their own families. And people started looking at other activities to generate income, and the per capita for food production declined, even though they were looking at exporting a lot of these crops, but they were not the types of crops that you would produce that women would harvest to feed their communities. So looking at the rate in which women developed in Africa, we can say that it is the same in the Americas. If we had to compare, women's growth, especially the Black woman's growth in Africa, is comparable to the Black woman's growth anywhere in the Americas where Black women were brought to. So let's see, moving ahead, because I would like to leave some room for us to have some discussion and small group interaction. Looking at, post-independent African societies, obviously it's evident that there's the proportion of literate females in sub-Saharan Africa. And when you say sub-Saharan Africa, it just means that the northern part of Africa, because there's a lot of Arab influence, they tend to divide up from where northern Africa, starts, and say, Black Africa, anything from, where West Africa starts from to South Africa, then that would be called sub-Saharan Africa. So looking at the proportion of literate females in sub-Saharan Africa to the number of males who are educated, there's been an increase since the 1990s, from 64% to 77% in 1999, and about 85% by 2005. Significant increase that women were now able to, go to school or have some roles. But if you compare those roles to other developing countries, it is not as significant. Even though Africa can boast the one continent out of all the continents outside of Africa that has produced the most female leaders in terms of presidents or prime ministers. You have the highest number on the African continent. But you may be asking, if Africa has produced more female presidents, why is the continent still the way that it is? What I would, in my own opinion, would be that there are a lot of things to still be done, a lot of loopholes to be sealed and covered, and a lot of, development plans that are not favorable, because now Africa is operating under the, like a Western type of political agenda, or, so it's not really, it doesn't work well for the continent, because many people who actually come into power have an African mindset. They may be educated in Western countries, but remember, you're not just one leader making the decision. You have constituents, you have, other people that, expect you to, be accountable to them. So before your 4-year end, there's so much that you can do in terms of a lot of development activities, especially one that relates to gender and development. So it's been known that in the countries of Lesotho and Botswana, and these are two countries in Southern Africa, there are more females than males in schools. So we can also find the same pattern in the United States. You have a significant higher number of Black females in educational, higher educational institutions compared to Black men. So it's there's a correlation in attainment of higher education by African women in Lesotho and Botswana, and also looking at the role of women or leadership, in parliaments or in government or in politics. Rwanda actually has the lead. I believe about 50% or so of the Rwanda government consists of women in key decision making. So, which is very impressive. So here, I want to quickly show you so far female presidents in Africa, and this is post-independence. This is from, let's say, 1990 to present. I may be missing one or two or so. I know the current president of Tanzania is not there, and I believe there was a prime minister of maybe Ethiopia or so that is not included. So we have over here Sir Johnson Sirleaf of Liberia, Joyce Banda of Malawi, Panza of Central African Republic. And like I mentioned, there have been female leaders in Tanzania, in Ethiopia, in so many other places in Africa. So here I'm going to, actually, I believe this presentation, you're going to find it in today's Blackboard content. So we're not going to go over all these, African women rays of hope information. But again, because of the post-colonial activities of many women around Africa and collaborating with women around the world, women are now highly knowledgeable in terms of human rights, in terms of, activities that concerns them the most. they're able to be part of the decision making. They may not be able to effect change immediately, but they can certainly voice out their dissatisfaction because they're protected under the law. Of course, it's not every country that protects women's human rights. It's not every country that has a law in place that actually goes by those protection. But one thing under the international standard that pretty much every country knows about is the CEDAW Convention, which is the Convention on the Elimination of All Discrimination Against Women. I believe almost every country that is affiliated with the United Nations has signed that. There are, of course, some notable countries that, you'll be ashamed at their, political records, who make decisions all over or for other countries to implement or follow, but without carrying out those implementations or law right on ground. So name withheld, but in conclusion, I would like to say that African women have come a long way from pre-colonial times to colonization and then to independence struggle until now. Even though there are a lot of opportunities way better in Africa today compared to during colonization and the years immediately following independence, African women have come a long way. And as you begin to review many of those resources on Blackboard, you're going to see that when we shift from the African continent and looking at the experiences of the African woman on the continent of Africa, and then shifting focus to the Americas, the periods during the slave trade, especially in the South and in the Caribbean, you're going to find out that it was so challenging for the Black woman, who was used to being part of the decision making in Africa, who was consulted or sought after, during trading with Europeans, with the Arabs, with people from other places, now had to be a slave. And even when African women were captured during wars or invasions as indentured servants or even as concubines, the treatment was nothing compared to the experiences of the Black woman in the Atlantic world. The struggle, of course, still continues or is still present in the African kingdom, on the continent today. Just a second, please. Yeah, sorry about that. So looking at the experiences of the Black woman on the African continent, and then looking at the experiences of the African woman in the Atlantic world, I want us to keep in mind that when we're looking at the, feminism of the Black woman in, the Atlantic world, we're looking at not only the United States, so keep that in mind. Slavery did not just happen in the United States. Black women's liberation or struggle did not only happen in the United States, because I tend to get a lot of comments from students about what is happening or what has happened about the struggles of the Black woman in the United States. We have places in the Caribbean where Black women continue to struggle. We have in Latin America, in Central America, and of course, on the African continent today. So I want to open up the floor for discussion. What are your thoughts about the content of today's, Blackboard, today's lecture?
Hi, Professor. It's Michelle Lucky here.
Yes, hi.
Hi, I felt like the lecture was very informative, especially
Okay.
yeah, very informative. I didn't know a lot
Can
about
you put your camera on, please, so I can see who you are? Because our class is online, so we don't get to see face to face. So please, if you ask a question, let me see who you are, even if it's for 10 seconds, so that when you make your postings on Blackboard, I'll be able to relate to who it is.
Oh yeah, yes. 1 second.
Hi, Michelle, how are you?
I'm doing well. Just a little
Nice to
chilly
meet
today.
you.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I really enjoyed the lecture. It was very informative. That's how I felt about it. Yeah, that was my thoughts on it.
So what aspect of the lecture did you enjoy? The pre-colonial, post-colonial, independence, or post-independence history of African women, or
History.
correlation
I
of
was. It was the history of African women, I would say.
okay.
Yeah.
And what about the history caught your attention?
Specifically, I don't know. Specifically right now. I'm so sorry, but I don't know.
It's okay. You know, I know I caught you off guard, so that's fine, you know.
Yeah, sorry.
But I'm glad, you know, many of us, you know, even at some point, if I didn't study African history, many
Yeah.
of these information I would not even know myself, you know.
Yes.
And so much of the African woman's history has been distorted, even by African women themselves, because of the education that they got from colonial times, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So regarding the assignments, sorry, this might be off topic.
Yeah, so hold the assignment question for a moment. Let me go around and let's conclude with the lecture, and then we're going to break off into maybe some small groups for students to just discuss or something like that if we have some time. And then we can, you know, open it up for work due.
Okay.
All right, so hold your question for a few minutes. Any other person? Okay, I see Kaden wrote a question in the chat. What tribe were you talking about? I'm sorry, I'm just seeing that chat right now. Can you refresh my memory as to the information that you were asking what tribe that was about?
It was the tribe where you're talking about that movie.
Oh, they're from Dahomey. I believe they're you know, the fun of Dahomey.
What is it called? Can you send it in chat so I could copy and paste?
Yes. So Google Amazon tribe or Amazon warriors. I'm going to type it in the text of Dahomey. Look them up. And as a matter of fact, there's a queen mother. She's actually Haitian from Haiti, and she's married to one of the kings in that community. And she goes back and forth. She's like the diaspora queen mother, representative of Haiti, the diaspora too, you know, the Dahomey or Bini kingdom, you know, who is from that specific tribe. I'm going to see if you know, she would allow me to use, there was a documentary, I believe, I think that I can use the documentary. She did a documentary or a speaking engagement a few weeks ago on the female warriors or the worth of the Dahomey or those women leaders in Bini kingdom or Dahomey kingdom. So I'm going to look for that and upload it in the Blackboard content.
They said they conquered neighboring villages and enslaved them.
Yes, so when they slayed them, it doesn't, I mean, when you have a war, it doesn't mean wars are rosy where, you know, so maybe they were fighting to protect their own territory. There may have been a lot of unrest or other activities that triggered them standing up for their community or their rights or something like that. Because most times what you would even find how activities happened on the African continent is that you would have Europeans or other people that would come and start dividing up different communities and making one community feel that they are much better than the other, and in so doing they really destroy the identity, the language, the culture, economic, trade, everything. And then when one community feels that they're better than another, and the other community would then gather themselves together, spring up and take over maybe what was previously theirs and fight for their rights, proving that they were not to be trampled or stepped on. So I don't think at any given point in time Africans would promote terrorism and just spring up and start fighting. It was rarely known. Most of this happened historically because of the intrusion or because of the visitors that came from other communities to specific communities to interfere with their day-to-day living. You will notice that most African societies, they would live based on family, heritage or lineage. And one thing I also did not mention is that we had the patrilineal and the matrilineal way of living in Africa. In the matrilineal system, you would usually trace your heritage through your mother, or you would, when you have a matrilineal society, that means women were included in the decision making, in the planning, in the activities from A to Z of what was happening in that community. But when you have the patrilineal society, you would trace your lineage or ancestry only through your male or the father's lineage. And when you have a patriarchal society, then women's voices are not heard. They're not partners, they're not decision makers, they're not advisors. They're usually absent and not made to feel as part of contributing factor to those communities. Let's see who else has any comments to. Yes, Mohammed.
Yes, Professor. I just want to add regarding.
Yes, okay, Professor. I said Professor. Mohammed, can you put your camera? Let me see you, please. Also, Kaden.
No problem, Professor.
Hi, Kaden. How are you?
Yes.
I'm good. I'm chilling.
Kaden, of course, I know you. You've come to office hours several times, so
Yeah.
Nice to see you again. Hi, Mohammed.
Hi, Professor.
How are you?
I'm all right.
Good to see you again, Mohammed.
So yeah, I just wanted to add that regarding of the last part you said about the Amazon from Dahomey, the Korean version of Benin. I think the president, Patrice Talon, he built like a kind of monument to a kind of tribute to the Amazon. So that means that's a kind of a will of the government to recognize, that women in the past used to help a lot of these countries. So I just wanted to add this on the.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I heard of the monument also. I think this was about maybe less than 6 months ago or something like that, that I saw that, monument about the information. You remember when I mentioned earlier that the history of Africa is usually not written. So one way to recognize or to put the history out is to create a monument. And then you would have a historian that would come to tell you, oh, this monument recognizes or depicts the story of the Amazon women, or, different very notable women in the society. So you're not going to have a textbook. Instead of having 100-page textbook about the Amazon women, they would they would sculpt or carve, a specific event. And when you see female warriors as a sculpture in the middle of town, you would say, oh, who are these? You automatically know they're women warriors, but then you'll be wondering how influential they were in the society. And then you would have a historian come to tell you about, they could sit there all day and night and telling you about who they are, where they came from, their, contributions to those societies. So thank you so much, Mohammed, for your, for noting that. Any other comments from anybody?
When did they start slavery in like in Europe and all of those places?
So when we're talking of slavery, all types of slavery have, has existed on the continent of Africa. But the one that we have in mind, because it's almost still present, if not present, but under a new facade or a new name, is the transatlantic slave trade that many people in the Americas, especially the United States, would know about. So we've had, slavery on the continent of Africa for many, 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 many centuries. But it's not the type of transatlantic savagery of slavery or sadistic treatment of Black people. You see, in many parts of Africa, even in pre-colonial times, people used to sell their children or household members to work for other communities. So let's say you wanted to grow some crops and you didn't have enough land, there were no system of currency in many locations at the time. So they would barter, like they would trade and barter on goods and services. They would say, okay, I'm going to give you 10 of my family members who are over the age of 21 to work for you in your house on your farm for the next 5 years. And then we're going to get 10% of the crops that they produce, and they will bring it back home after 5 years. And of course, if your slaves are not well taken care of, if they're not well fed, they're not going to have the energy or strength to be able to work on the farms. So during, that's one type of indentured servanthood in Africa. There were other types of slavery that, communities will invade each other to prove their political or economic prowess, to say that, we're more powerful than you. So from now, all the kings in this area have to pay homage to one specific king in one specific location. So those type of slavery also existed, by war, fighting one community over the other. And then we had another type of slavery where at the time, most people don't know of the Arab slave trade. And it was even said that the Arab slave trade at one point was worse than the transatlantic slave trade. Many, many years ago, this, Arab slave trade, where Arabs would come from, through North Africa, or, they will come and trade. There used to be mutual trading, especially when you had the, kingdoms like Timbuktu or the Songhai Empire, or, Mali, empires. You had the Ghana Empire. They will come through the waterways and set up trading posts, where other kings would come with merchants and goods. And, you've heard of, the king in Timbuktu, who was like the richest person, Mansa Musa, trading all over the place. He would take slaves with him to places in Europe, to the Arabias and things like that. You had queens like Queen Hatshepsut and, so many, many other queens who would lead trading expeditions. They would take slaves with them. But the slaves we're talking about were not the type of transatlantic slave like European slave trade of Africa to the Americas, where people were chained and locked in the mouth and, raped and whipped and things like that, and starved and, expected to continue to produce, you see. So, where families were broken apart permanently in, when you're looking at slave trade in Africa, not that, of course, anything that keeps you from being independent or having your human rights is good, but I'm just explaining that there has been all types of slave trade, on the continent. So it depends on what we're, what, century we're even talking about, So if we look at another type of slave trade, even today, in 2022, we have slavery still going on in Africa. You hear of modern day slave trade because of the economic problems in many of the countries. Females, young women are lured to places in Europe, to North Africa, to Asia, that they're going to be working as au pairs or as babysitters. And then they're held in travel camps where they're mistreated, close to the, the treatment of what we, heard of or seen during the transatlantic slave trade in the Americas. So, we have that still going on in places in North Africa, in holding or travel camps in Libya, of Africans trying to get to Italy and different places in Asia to work as housemates so that they could send some money home to their families. So those types of systems of slave trade still, they're still ongoing, but by far, I wouldn't say that one system of slavery is better or worse than the other. Anything that keeps you from being yourself or thriving or productive in society is a violation of human rights. And, I think because we live or we are in the United States, and because of the ongoing racism towards Black people or people of African descent, there's a lot of, backlash of, modern day slavery with, institutional slavery that keeps, the brown and Black communities from progressing as fast as, white communities. There's still significantly a large number of Black men who are in prison away from their families, causing further the Black family to be disintegrated, separated, or kept under destruction for a long time, if not permanently, I meant. Any other questions or comments? Let's see. I see one by Max. So Max is saying, hello, everyone. Professor, are there any country in Africa where sister wives still take place? Well, I'm not sure if they call them sister wives. Today, I'm not sure if they're called that, but hold on one second. So Max was asking if there was, still sister wives going on in Africa, like, countries where sister wives still takes place. I wouldn't know if they're called sister wives, but of course there are many communities where, men are free and are free to marry, multiple women or other wives. So I don't know if they would call them sister wives, but definitely there are societies and communities where the marriage of more than one woman takes place in those communities. And it's not for, physical procreation or enjoyment like we have today, but especially if you are a king, it's part of the culture to be married to more than one woman. First things first, like in pre-colonial times, you would have a large kingdom to take care of. and the work of the woman will be divided if there are other women in the house. You know, the king is believed to be very wealthy. So if you're very wealthy, you should be able to take care of more than, you know, 1 or 2 or 3 children and 1 or 2 or 3 wives. But my own opinion is that as the society has changed and things are different nowadays, especially looking at health-wise, the rate or increase in contraction of, you know, diseases, you know, we should be very careful looking at how tradition is interwoven into modernity, and looking at whose modernity we're also looking at in terms of living our tradition. So these are some of the aspects of gender and development that needs to come, I believe, from the side of the African woman or the Black woman in general, you know, having a say or decision in what has affect them the most. But, you know, if you look on the other side, most of the activities that affect the Black woman or the African woman on the African continent, the problem nowadays would come from women themselves. You know, it would be other women that would be fighting to tear other women and try to keep them down. It's women who would, you know, not make another woman want to progress because they want to be the only source of, you know, activity or progress or decision making or something like that. So, you know, it's I mean, there's a lot of confusion everywhere, in as much as there's a lot of you know, opportunities to liberate the mind of the Black woman, whether on the African continent or in the Americas. So yes, to answer your question, there are communities or societies that engage in you know, the marriage of multiple women or more than one wife as a spouse, but I don't know if they call them sister wives like in other locations. Do we have any other question? And Max, I didn't see what you look like. Can you put on your camera? Let me see you, please.
Yes, sorry, I was just, my daughter was crying. That's why I was texting.
Oh, no problem. Oh, hi, Max. Nice to see you. All right. So do we have any other comments about today's lecture? Or do we have any questions or any feedback?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes, Alvin, can I see what you look like, please?
Yeah, sure.
Hi, Alvin. How
I
are
have a
you?
question about the slavery, about
Yes.
the Atlantic slave. Were there any instance where they took like Black Africans for military? Because I heard they got a lot of European wars.
Yes, you're correct about that. As a matter of fact, I don't have the specific date in front of me, but the French, they actually recruited a lot of Senegalese army to fight on their behalf. And, you know, they were instrumental with France. I mean, for France to win, I'm not sure if it's World War I or II or what war they were fighting or something like that, but I do know that there was a large contingent of Senegalese men who were recruited from Africa to fight with the French or fight for the French, you know, in France, you know, for many years.
Yeah, because I think I heard like what they were fighting back in the 18th century.
Yeah.
I read an article about that somewhere.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know the exact date, but you're correct. And you know that Senegal is a former French colony. So they did recruit a lot, like so many Senegalese men were taken to France to fight for the French.
Okay.
So the reason why I said, at first I said with the French, they were not fighting with the French, they were fighting for the French. It's the same as the
Yeah.
Civil War in the United States, the black American recruited soldiers were not fighting for, they were not fighting with the white soldiers in the United States, they were fighting for the white soldiers in the United States, because if you're fighting with together to win on behalf of your country, things would be equal, right? But we find a lot of racism in, even the Civil War, in the French army, so on, all over. So it seems that the African or the black race, always has the short end of the stick, where without the power or the inclusion of the black man or the black man or the black woman in many of these historical wins for many countries, they would have lost, right? Like the French would have lost all those wars if those, active African men were not engaged in fighting for the French, for the Civil War also, if the black man in America was not engaged or involved in, fighting for, the white army in the United States, they would not definitely have not won whichever war that they were fighting. So come to think of it, if the black man or the black woman, if they're so influential in helping other communities or other societies win wars, to thrive economically or politically or whatnot, why are they still being mistreated? Is it that the black man and the black woman, they're so weak mentally, or they've been coerced mentally not to be able to think, to fight for themselves or know their rights or worth, So it's, I don't understand it myself. So don't ask me, even though I teach African history, I'm yet to find the answer. So if any of you know the answer, please text me, email me, call me and let me know.
I have a question.
Yes.
Do you think that that all of these problems like racism, and sexism and stuff like that is just a problem with like the lower class of people?
Well, in every society, you have those who are haves and the have not, the bourgeois and the proletariat, or those who, they control the means of production, they control the economy, they have money to infuse into the economy, while you have others that may have a lot of ideas, but unfortunately, they cannot influence others with money. So, you're going to find that those who are able to influence the society and infuse money into different activities will control decision, they will control policy, they will control the law, they will control what takes place and what does not take place. So that is in every society, whether it's in Africa or the Americas, or, in Europe or in Asia. It's just, I don't know if it's the law of human
So
race or something, but I don't know. But
what why
yes,
doesn't every person should like strive to get to that point then?
well, like I mentioned, there are people who from the beginning. So for example, let's look at white European migration from Europe to the Americas. When Europeans were fleeing Europe, they were fleeing persecution, right? They were fleeing the laws and the policies that existed at the time, and they needed a new place where they can exert themselves from, away from those laws that were set that did not benefit the lower class in those societies. So that's one way in which people actually migrated to form a different society in the Americas. But come to think of it, you're running away from a law that did not benefit you and you wanted to, move somewhere else. That came with also then mistreating the people you found when you got here, like the Native Americans. It included hauling millions of lives from Africa to the Americas to work the same way that Europeans at the time were, held, to be working in, in Europe. They then start mimicking the same types of system, to take over the weaker, humans that they encountered or that, they met along the way or in the Newfoundlands. So sometimes you would wonder, why would people sit and don't do anything? Of course, if Black women were not instrumental during the slave trade era, there would not have been the abolition of slavery. You have stories or stories or accounts of Black women like Sojourner Truth and so many others who were able to lead slaves into freedom, or help them escape the harsh conditions or the the sadistic treatment on slave plantations. So there's been many instances where you have women helping, in those societies, and so on and so forth. So there have been people who have fought for human rights, who have fought for justice. So many women, so many men, they don't just sit and wait around for those communities to suffer. Yes, sorry about that. What was your question, please?
So do you think like the problem is just like a case of people being lazy?
I don't think so. It could be, historically, Black people are not known to be lazy.
So what about now?
Now, because of a lot of things that has happened in history, it has changed people's mindsets. It has changed their identity, their awareness, the knowledge that they have acquired, So when we start looking at how slavery has affected the Black woman, you're going to see that a lot of policies were put in place to make sure that the Black family was divided. When you don't have a structure, when you're by yourself, they say the idle mind is the devil's workshop. When you don't have the support necessary as a community, when your community cannot thrive, when you cannot take care of your children or family, or to get education as the other person, then it starts giving you start generating all types of negative behaviors. So of course, don't get me wrong, there are many lazy Black people who would depend on government services and things like that. But there, at the same time, there's so many other Black people who feel that, that is just as a compensation for historical events. That, as a matter of fact, if you go to the Jewish community, even though the Jewish community is intact, there's a support structure in that community. But this same government that, this same government that we live in, they're able to lobby other governments to support, the Jewish community. Namely, the German government does pay for caretaking of many Holocaust survivors. And we're talking people who were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old when they were taken from Germany and brought to many places in the, like in the United States. They have pretty much their social services package, you know, taken care of from day one till the day they die, you know, but you don't find that happening for people of African descent. Most notably, you don't have that happening for Black America. And when Black America goes to seek for social services support, it's known as welfare. Of course, you know, it's welfare, but the connotation that is given to the terminology makes it look like, you know, a poor Black thing, like, oh, you're on welfare. So what? You know, if you're on welfare, that means it's a way or means of a government to be able to provide for its citizens so that temporarily or permanently they would not be suffering. You know, they will have food to eat, they will have a place to stay, they will have health services and so on and so forth. So these are some things. Of course, don't get me wrong, there are many Black females who, you know, they justify being on these services as a compensation of the treatment that they received in the hands of the Black man who deserted them and left them with all these children, or to the white society or the oppressive institutional racism that they have experienced or that their parents or ancestors experienced. Yes, so did you hear my explanation?
Yeah.
Okay, so don't get me wrong, they are very, very hardworking Black people, you know, and at the same time, they're very, very lazy Black people. Just like they're lazy white people or, you know, any other race. So you have both in every society.
So do you think the majority of Black people are lazy, or are they outgoing?
Well, it depends on what context you're talking about, but
Like in terms of, I guess, being successful.
I don't think that majority of, you know, when you say majority, are you talking of the entire Black race from Africa to its diaspora, or you're
Well,
talking of Black people in the United States?
In the US.
In the US?
I feel like people or Black people in the US have more of a chance of becoming like millionaires and billionaires and stuff like that.
Well, you're right. In comparison to other Black nations or places where you have Black people around the world, in the United States, you actually have the opportunity for Black people to excel more than Black people anywhere around the world. But unfortunately, and I say unfortunately, you have to grapple with the fact that institutional racism is still very prevalent in the United States history, you know, current day history. You know, when you say history, that means it happened already. So this is not even history. Like, the fabric of the society was built on slavery, you know, on racism. So that institutional racism still exists regardless of all the laws that are there to protect and guide and offer support of this or that, but you still have the institutional racism still very, very on top of the you know, equality ladder. But I wouldn't say that Black people are lazy. I think that if you go to many inner cities, you're going to find that the hands of many Black people are tied, you know, like in the shackles or chains of slavery. They may want to break off loose of those chains, but, you know, institutionally they are tied. Seldom would you find, you know, parity in terms of, you know, socio-economic value or attainment of a Black person in America that you can compare to a white person. Of course, don't get me wrong, there are Black billionaires and Black millionaires in America, but the support, if you compare the number of millionaires or billionaires who are Black and what they have done to uplift the Black community in comparison to, let's say, a white millionaire or billionaire or a Jewish billionaire or millionaire. You cannot compare it, you see. So when you have a people or a community that has gone through some sort of, you know, maltreatment, whether slavery or Holocaust or any other historical challenge, when you have a slight number of, you know, the community that has excelled, they're supposed to be paying forward to the next generation or to the future. But we don't have that. There's no unity in the Black community, you know, which is key in maintaining structure, in maintaining balance, in maintaining identity, in surpassing all elements of previous historical, you know, maltreatment or judgment or whatnot. So if you go to other communities, they're usually tight-knit, but you don't find that in the Black community. And when I say Black community, I'm not talking of Black American community alone. Even with this conversation already, for me to have to explain to you that I'm not, you know, talking about Black Americans alone, already there's the division, like, oh, you know, you may be talking of Caribbean or African or African American, you know. So automatically, you know, you start saying the problem of the African American community surpasses, you know, Africans on the continent or, you know, Haitians or Jamaicans or this or that. And then you're like, whew, that's why, you know, you cannot really get things done bringing the entire Black race together, because there's so much problems for each. And the institution was created to divide. So, but we on our own, we're letting the institution divide us further by not coming together, because we're saying, oh, we're different. Ours is more than yours. Take care of ours first. Do this first. Let's do this. Let's do that separately, and blah, blah, blah. So that's where the majority of the problem comes in. So in as much as you have identity crisis in the US, you know, like the Black man not having his own identity, not knowing who he is, you know, he's a Black man in America, but he doesn't have a country that he can call, you know, Black America. Whereas, you know, I, as a Nigerian, you know, I have a country. If anything happens in the United States, you know, I can always buy a plane ticket and go back to Nigeria. Whereas, you know, the Black American does not have that. They're stuck here, or they can just, you know, say, okay, let me see, on the map. I'm going to travel to this country and just make it my home. I'm going to go to the Caribbean and say, you know, I'm Haitian or Jamaican or Trinidadian or something like that. So that's one of the challenges. But unfortunately, the problem is so there that I don't know, maybe to take your future, the future generations to, you know, bring a different mindset in the problem or challenges of the Black community, and especially in the problem that affect the Black woman in the Black community. Because when we're looking at Black feminism, we're not looking at racism, we're looking at sexism and racism. So the Black woman has two problems. First of all, that they are female, and, you know, or first things first, they are Black, and then they are female. So when you look at the career ladder or opportunity ladder, the Black woman always comes last. Even when the Black woman is more educated, has more to offer, they don't have a lot of support, because they have not been the number or level of Black women who have made it to prominent positions. And those in prominent positions who are Black women, they are struggling with their own advancement issues. You know, when they navigate and get into those places of employment or career or corporate opportunities or educational opportunities, they want to advance to the next step or the step above the next step and so on and so forth, but they don't have any other Black person who has been there who is a female. Usually when they're the first, they have to work their ways, and they're compounded with a lot of problems on the job or in those places that the ability for them to even be of help or, to mentor other Black women is very nano. So that's one of the, greatest problems that the Black woman has encountered, being racially Black and gender-wise female.
So, but wouldn't that mean that applies to like guys as well, since they have to make their way up sooner? Since they have to,
Who? I didn't hear you, sorry.
I said, wouldn't that be the case for guys as well then, since we have to provide basically for the family?
Mm-hmm.
So wouldn't that mean that guys would have to struggle with that more?
They also would struggle, but the Black man is easily accepted in spheres where you have white men. White men would rather compete, even though they may look down on the Black man, but they would rather compete, with the Black man than having a Black woman competing with them.
I mean,
so
but because that, I guess that wouldn't be fair then.
no, it would not be fair, even though there are all these laws.
So,
you will not even believe a lot that goes on in the corporate world, but let's keep that out of the discussion for now. But if you had the Black man and a white man competing for the same job, of course, the white male may be offered the employment faster and advance obviously faster. The Black man will be looked at obviously before the Black woman's application. And don't get me wrong, there have been instances where Black women have, surpassed, corporate growth and other executive opportunities around the country.
I feel like it would depend on the job though, because you wouldn't see like a lot of Black women trying to go into construction. You wouldn't try to see them going into like garbage disposal and stuff like that. So I feel like that's why
there are Black women there, but you're right. You're not going to see many Black women in sanitation or construction.
Like basically hardworking jobs.
Yeah. Well,
you have to be active and stuff like that.
If you say hardworking jobs,
like,
what
I
do you
mean,
mean?
like physical. Like
yeah,
physical.
I understand. I was just saying, I wanted you to rephrase it, because when you say hardworking, are you saying that unless you're doing heavy lifting, you're not working hard?
Yeah, I meant like things that you like have to.
Yeah,
like,
I understand. Yeah, I understand. But think of it. I don't know about in America, people do pretty much anything to sustain the family or put the food on the table. If you have a Black woman in Africa working sanitation job or construction, she'll be single for a long time, because men will be afraid of her, that she may beat them up or think she's macho or something like that, or want to control them or make decisions, or she think like now she's a male, she can be saying that or this.
That's what I was about to say. I feel like they wouldn't just get with her because she acts masculine.
Yeah.
I don't think any guy wants a masculine female.
Yeah, that happens a lot, more often than not,
But isn't that then what like feminism is trying to do, like make women more independent by making them like try to be more masculine?
Well, I wouldn't say more masculine, but just saying that you can pretty much do the same. You can be, you can have the same mindset of growth opportunity. You can compete just as men. Don't limit yourself. Do the same, that if you're going to thrive, think in the same direction, because you realize it's mostly patriarchal society. So you have to put those pants on instead of waiting for somebody to come feed you. Otherwise, you're going to be hungry for a long time, So put those pants on and get out there and show that you also have that macho element. It doesn't mean psychologically that you begin to manipulate or control people with your physical prowess, but it just means that you can have the masculine the same way that men think you get out there and get the job done. But at the same time, you don't forget that you have a family, or that, that you're female. It doesn't mean mentally that, females can't do anything. But when you look at Black feminism, it's not that it's telling you to be masculine. It's not telling you to, leave what started the problem behind. You're going to examine it, and then, you're going to address it by, getting up and doing something. So, I wouldn't agree that he's saying, be masculine. It's just saying have the masculine concepts and thoughts. If Black men could fight the fight, or, you get up and, fight the fight, even though Black women have been fighting for such a long time. And, it doesn't mean the myth of the angry Black woman type of fight. I mean, fighting in the struggle, fighting against oppression, fighting against injustice, Are there any other questions or comments from the class? All right, so I'm going to post the link of this lecture on Blackboard. So I'm going to stop the recording, and we can hang around for the next 15 to 20 minutes to address what we may have. Yes. Is it relating to the lecture today, or what is due? Okay.
Well, it's relating to your book. I just wanted to know, what was your inspiration in writing that?
So my inspiration in writing that actually came from a lot of my own personal struggle to try to make it after my graduate degree. And I looked at my history as a Black woman, my history as a Nigerian woman, looking at my mom and to other women in my family or in my community, and the struggles that, or the challenges that they overcame. So pretty much that book was sort of like about myself, because I am in the Generation X group, and I wanted to study, or I wouldn't say maybe study myself, but I wanted to see what the gaps were with the advancement of women in the same age group, with the same types of qualifications, why they had a lot of challenges in upward mobility, and some of the just what may be going on with them. Hold on, let me get the book and show on the screen for those of you that may not have it. So this is the book she's referring to. For those of you who may not have a copy of it, it's one of the required texts for class, Generation X, The Role of Culture on the Leadership Styles of Women in Leadership Positions. So when we're talking of women in leadership positions, I wanted to also look at the role that culture played in the transformation of women's leadership. We've discussed today about African women being included in decision-making in pre-colonial times. And then fast forward to, the challenges that Black women have currently today. So that book was to survey a lot of my colleagues who were women leaders in different, aspect of career or business, in Nigeria. And of course, the research was not limited to just, the plight of women only in Nigeria. You will find out that sections of the book actually talks about power and how to hold power, how to use power to influence decision-making, how, in a patriarchal society, women can actually use the power that they have to be able to influence decision and policies, and to be able to use that to their added advantage, you know, to be able to thrive in their communities or societies, so that women are not left behind. You know, they are carried along or revered as very informative, knowledgeable, and, you know, as people who can contribute enormously, or who had contributed enormously to the growth of various communities and societies.
I have a question about one of the pages on the book, because
Yes.
on page 86, like on the graph or the bar chart, like we can't really see the labels on the bottom.
Page 86. Okay, which
The bar chart, like you can't see
that said
the
figure 18?
Huh?
Is it? Let me see if I can.
Yeah.
You
Like,
mean here?
no, on this.
Oh, you mean on the top, figure
Yeah, yeah,
17?
because under the chart, like you can't read the with the
Yeah, I
bar.
see. It's a little bit blurry. I see. So I think for that, you know, it's asking about the different leadership and decision-making styles. And in leadership studies, when we talk of you know, the different leadership and decision-making styles, we have bureaucratic leadership styles, we have transformational leadership styles, we have autocratic leadership styles, laissez-faire leadership styles. So each of these type of leadership and decision making, you know, influences the type of decision a person would make in an environment. So if you go to page 87 to, I believe, page 90 or so, the description, you see, like up here, you see it says democratic style. So it actually explains those types of leadership styles. You have situational leadership style on page 89. You have the transformational leadership style, you know, on page 89 also. So pretty much what this graph is showing is the age, the number of people who have selected the different leadership styles and how they've applied it, or how they plan to apply it, or how they've viewed or experienced other people use those leadership styles in their various places of employment or business. So you're right.
But which one is which though? Because it doesn't really, like, you can't really read it.
Yeah. So what I'm gonna do in the thanks for bringing that to my attention. I'm going to look for the actual graph that is not part of the book, and I'm going to upload it on Blackboard, and then I will say, okay, this is the bar from page 86 that, you know, you were asking about. So you're right. I didn't, you know, in another set of printed publication, they did show. So this one, I don't know why they kind of blurred out. You're right.
Yeah, thank
So
you.
I believe the first one was bureaucratic. And then the third one is situational. And then the last one, I believe, is transformational. So I have to look at the actual images or figures and upload the correct, you know, I mean, the non-printed but actual, you know, graph or chart to you.
Mm.
Does anyone have any other question about the book or the lecture for today? Or any comments? All right, so hang around, and we can use the rest of the time for you know, office hours. All right, thank you everyone. It was a pleasure to have you here today. So I'm going to send a link. I will post it on the Blackboard announcement page. And one thing that I want you to be doing every week is to make sure that you check the announcement page. attendance has been very low for this class in terms of your productivity to engage or to interact with each other on Blackboard. So please continue to work on the weekly discussion thread questions or summaries, and then to, not to forget to post your responses to one person for participation. And you want to always make sure that each week you have week 1 to 8. You're going to copy the response to each week's reading, and also one person you have responded to on Blackboard, and you're going to copy it on a Word document. And at the end of the semester, you're going to upload that document under the assignment tab that says participation. So please, every week, check the announcement page. Whatever content that I post on the announcement page, I always email you. Even if I make revisions, you will still have the content on the announcement page for you to review. All right. And anytime that we have office hours, make sure to stop by. Whenever we are not going to be meeting, I will let you know, but you have the work on Blackboard that you're supposed to do for that day already. All right, so I'm going to stop the recording, and we can hang around for any questions that you may have about your grade, the syllabus, or other work. Thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure seeing you all today, and have a great week ahead.
You too.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you, Prof.